the Virtual Antics Podcast. I am very excited today because I have a very special guest who is actually specializing in one of my favorite topics, which is podcast guest marketing. So welcome, Erin. How are you today?
I'm really good, thanks. How are you, Natalie?
I'm doing fantastic. So I have always been huge in the podcast world, not just because I have my own show, but before that, I helped a lot of entrepreneurs start their podcasts. And I started out as a podcast guest. So I love that you specialize in this. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do and how you got started?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Erin and I'm from England, as you can probably hear. I'm from Birmingham, but I live in London. And I actually got started with podcasts because I've always had a really personal connection to podcasts. Years ago, I found that podcasts were a really good way to get me through difficult times. If ever I was going through something, whether it was a breakup or a job issue or had anxiety, I listened to a podcast about that topic and I'd find it would really, really help me. And the people that help the most are the podcast guests if they specialize in something. So I've always had a passion for it, but it was only, I actually did a degree in media and communication. I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. I worked in customer service for years. And then it came to a point, I took a course in how to start my own business and I got thinking, oh, what do I want to do? And I saw this job opportunity to be a podcast pitcher. I saw it. I was like, I have no idea what this is, but it is so up my street because I have a good qualification and I love podcasts. So yeah, I got into it like that. And then I took a course on podcast pitching and then it's just my passion really. So yeah.
That is amazing. That is so cool. So what are some ways that podcast guesting can help entrepreneurs?
Oh, there's so many. So it can really help to build your reputation. It can help to grow an audience because you're getting exposure in front of a whole pool of your ideal client. It has the potential to generate warm leads. As the listeners get to know you through your story, they tend to warm up to you and it builds a sense of trust. So storytelling is powerful. And it also just makes you more human. It puts a voice behind the business. And it positions you as an expert in your field. And then another plus to it is being on a podcast is great for content repurposing. So you can use that podcast and repurpose it into different forms of content, share it across social media. So there's just so many benefits to it.
That's awesome. Yeah, one that I love doing funnels for podcasting. It's like one of the things that I teach at like different podcasting events and such. And it's really cool, like how much you can do with it. Like people are like, oh, you just go on a podcast show and that's it. And it's like, no, there's so much more you can do in the relationships you can build. And I know we talked about, my last episode was episode 10, and we talked about storytelling. And it's so interesting that you just mentioned that's a huge thing with podcast guesting. So can you expand a little bit more on like the storytelling part of it?
Yeah, storytelling. Well, I guess it's more of a case of when people hear your story, they can relate to you on a level where they might not necessarily if they just saw your Instagram profile. And then, I'm trying to think of an example now. Say an anxiety coach, for instance. If you have anxiety and you're tuning in to a podcast, listening to an anxiety coach, and they're talking about their own journey of how they overcame anxiety, they might have gone through something really similar to that listener. That listener then has that connection and she or he is like, oh, like this coach knows exactly what I'm going through. Maybe they can help me. So that's just one example of how storytelling can elevate your marketing and attract clients, because it just makes you seem so much more human than just sometimes just doing a post and being like, these are the benefits of da 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 da. Like it will attract your soul clients, as people like to call them, because people can relate to you in some way.
Yeah, and that's so cool, especially when you come to like the repurposing of it, right? So you can take that. I know I was just a guest on another podcast, and we took that, we turned it into reels, we made it into a blog on our website, and then they had a YouTube video, so we embedded it on the website. And there's just so many cool things that you can do, like you said, to repurpose that content so your story is reaching more people over and over again in the right ways.
100%. And it's not only going out to your audience, it's going out to a whole new audience. And if you pitch yourself to the right podcasts whose listener demographic is the same as your ideal client, then it's just like magic. And I'm a big advocate for sustainable visibility, putting yourself on podcasts over time, not just one or two here and there. Just keep going on them, but at a pace that is right for you and works for you. Because I know there's people out there who are moms and entrepreneurs and super busy, but even if you pitch yourself to say one podcast a day or one podcast every 2 days, over time that will build up, and before you know it, you're getting yourself on podcasts and just increasing your visibility and doing great things for your business and your reputation. And I could go on, but it's just such a great thing.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing is like, I know I've had like a lot of friends and clients that want to be guests, and they're like, well, I'm not available during daytime hours. I'm like, so are most podcasters. I have interviews at 10 p.m. at night sometimes. So the more that, you put yourself out there, you'll be able to find someone with a matching schedule to you if your schedule is an issue. Now,
Yeah.
you mentioned finding your ideal client through, these podcast listeners. How would they find a podcast that has their ideal client?
Yeah, so there's I guess it's just a lot of research is involved in it. There's so many ways you can find podcasts. Obviously, we have the tool of Podmatch, which is fantastic. And it actually, on Podmatch, it does say on the podcasts who their listeners are. So that's one way. But then just generally doing research, you can get a feel for who their listeners are. Sometimes it will say in the bio on Spotify or iTunes. And yeah, you can tell on their website. If you just do a little bit of digging, you will find the answers.
That's awesome. Now, what would be where would they get started? So if someone wants to start doing podcast guesting, what do you think is like the first thing they need to have ready or do?
Yeah, good question. So I would say to really go in on and reflect. So ask yourself your why and get clear on your why, because if you want to amplify your why, you're probably going to attract really good people. So you want to get clear on who you are, who you serve, what you do, and write down any ideas that you could bring to the table in terms of pitching a story, perhaps. Like we were talking about storytelling, but it's good to have some stories in the back of your mind that you would be ready to put out there if you were to be on a podcast, and just do sort of like a self business audit, if you like. Write everything down, and when you're really happy with your your brand, your messaging, your values, your stories, and also write down ways that you can bring value to the listeners. And all this is really going to help with your podcast pitch before you start pitching to podcasts. And then the next step would be to just do your research and compile a big list of ideal podcasts, and then just work your way through them. So that's where you would start. And then, there's more to it with the pitch, but a key to a good pitch is to personalize it. And if you can, listen to an episode of the podcast you're pitching to and tell the podcast host what it is that you like about the episode. So there's a couple of tips sprinkled in there, but there's so much you can do to get yourself on podcasts, and I really encourage people to do it, because I love hearing people's stories, and I would say you have no idea who you're going to impact, but just know you will impact people. A tip you share might really resonate with someone, or a bit of your story might resonate, and you just never know. So put yourself out there. It's always worth it, and your story is unique, your experience is unique.
That's awesome. Now, what type of services do you offer, and how do you help entrepreneurs specifically?
Yeah, so I offer two different types of services. The first one is a done-for-you service. So I will book people, entrepreneurs, and online service providers and coaches and course creators onto podcasts as guests. So I'll book you onto 1 to 8 podcasts a month as a guest. And then I'll also do strategy calls as well to see if we need to change our messaging. I provide Voxer support too. So if anyone needs a bit of support in terms of not feeling confident, a bit nervous, I can step in and help with nerves too. You'd be surprised, but some people are quite scared to get in front of the mic because it's fear of the unknown. So I provide that kind of mindset support as well. And then the other service is coaching. So if you're not ready to invest in a publicist and you want to do it yourself, I do provide one-to-one Voxer support, again with the mindset work and just being a mentor in terms of guiding you towards what action to take and holding you accountable to pitching. So yeah, those are the services that I offer.
Awesome. Now I know what Voxer is, but I know a lot of my listeners don't. Can you explain what Voxer is?
Yeah, Voxer is basically, so you know, you go onto WhatsApp, you can send a voice message. So it's just sending voice messages back and forth, and I love it. Like I feel like it's Voxer support, voice message support. You feel really engaged and connected. I voice message my friends all the time and clients, and honestly, like it's just such a heart-centered way of connecting with someone. And you'd be surprised when you're sending a voicemail, a voice note, sometimes you have this stream of consciousness and you find aha moments. So that's why I find it to be really effective.
Yeah, I have a lot of, so the reason why I know that app, because I don't really use a lot of apps like that, is because I have clients that have dyslexia. And so they use Voxer to leave the voice notes in that way, and have me leave voice notes. So that way they're able to understand it easier, which is really cool because my daughter's just diagnosed with dyslexia. So we're going through that whole thing. So it's really cool.
Yeah.
And I think especially as busy entrepreneurs, we kind of get lost with all the emails and texts, and it's overwhelming. And a voice note is like, it's a breath of fresh air where you could just talk and not have to type it out.
Yeah, definitely. It is good. It's
That's
sometimes
awesome.
it's people's preferred method of contact, and I love it. So if it works for you, if you've never tried it, give it a go.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really cool tool that you offer in the coaching, because it's definitely, it's more personal, right? Because we're all interacting virtually. So the more connection we have with one another, which our voice is a huge part of that, I think is super important. So
Definitely.
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Where can we find you and get a hold of you, follow you, and all that?
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me on Instagram. My handle is at Erin Curran PR. And then I have a website, which is erincurran.uk. And then if you want to drop me an email and say hi, it's erincurranuk@gmail.com.
Awesome. And I'll make sure I put all that in the show notes. But thank you so much for joining me, Erin. It's been a pleasure
Oh,
having you.
thank you, Natalie. It's so lovely to connect with you.
Have a good day, guys.